Rhode Island Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse is one of those officials going to the climate summit, and he joins me now. Always good to see you, Senator. So when you get to Azerbaijan, what is your message to skeptics from around the world who think the U.S. is no longer going to be a leader?
Well, that's an obvious fact. The U.S. is not going to be a leader, at least at the federal government level. But California is the 5th biggest economy in the world. New York, where these fires are raging, is the 10th biggest economy in the world. You know, if California and New York work together, they can make a very big difference. They are collectively one of the biggest nations in the world, and they have enormous power and reason to lean into getting climate right. So that's one point. The other is that some of the things that we can get done are fairly straightforward. There's not a huge coalition in favor of leaking methane out of fossil fuel facilities. Plug the leaks. It's not that complicated. We can detect them from satellites now, so they can't hide. And defend the carbon border tariff that the EU and the UK have already agreed to. That will send a powerful climate economic signal into the US and China and India and other countries. And if they stick to their guns on that, that's a huge step for climate progress. So there are a lot of ways in which we can still work forward, notwithstanding the well-paid fealty of the Trump administration to fossil fuel interests.
You told Politico that Trump and Republicans are aiming a torpedo at climate progress that's been made over the past 4 years. So when you talk about things like New York and California, what are you seeing in terms of conversations? Are they starting? Is there going to be, as you see it, some level of cooperation, if not on a federal level, states working together? It's very hard to find a state that has not felt the effects of climate change over the last several years.
Yeah, I think two things are happening. One, there's some of that already. If you look at California's fuel economy standards, many states, including my home state of Rhode Island and New York, have adopted those standards. So they become the de facto national standard if you want to sell cars in the United States. And I think the more of that we do, led by big states like California and New York, the better off we will be. The second is Florida is right now ground zero for an insurance crisis that is going to spread beyond Florida. Property owners simply can't insure their properties. The rates have quadrupled. The companies have gone bankrupt. They've pulled out of the state. The whole thing is a mess, and the mess is moving along the Texas coast, and the California wildfires are creating a similar insurance crisis, and it's going to hit all coastal states. And it's going to hit wildfire-adjacent landowners. And we've even seen in the Carolinas from the recent flooding that states and areas that thought they were safe are now going to have huge insurance problems. So this insurance problem is going to become a national crisis quickly. And when it does, we're going to have to respond.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, there's a lot of my friends who live in Brooklyn who were shocked to see their local park spewing lots of smoke over the weekend. So let me ask you, do you think that this reality that so many people are seeing and feeling with weather events that have been tied to climate will overcome some of the loud and frankly successful voices who don't believe it even exists, that climate change is made up?
Yeah, I think one group that is going to be important is people who are fiduciaries for others. Management of companies who have fiduciary relationships to their stockholders, for instance. If you're a fiduciary and you're obliged to take care of the best interests of somebody to whom you have an obligation as their investment advisor or as a CEO, you have to be truthful about the real circumstances that relate to climate change. So as climate change comes home to roost economically, fiduciaries are going to be forced to tell the truth. And that will be an additional pushback well beyond just the environmental community or scientists against this propaganda campaign of deliberate lies that the fossil fuel industry has funded for so long.
Apart from your upcoming trip to Azerbaijan, let me ask you about something happening domestically, which is the Trump transition news, the choice of now former Congressman Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. Your colleague Dick Durbin has already asked the House Ethics Committee to preserve all the documentation they have from their 3-year investigation. Do you think the ethics report should be released ahead of any vote on Gaetz? Should it be made public? Let me get your overall reaction.
Oh, it actually should be provided to the Senate Judiciary Committee very early on in the proceedings. Like when his nomination papers are actually filed, we should have those ready to go. Similarly, we should have the Department of Justice's files on their investigation. These are not ordinarily public documents, but when the individual who's the subject of the Ethics Committee investigation or the Department of Justice criminal investigation wants to be Attorney General of the United States, and we're charged with evaluating his fitness, those are documents that become relevant and important and obviously something that we should see.
Have you heard from any Republican senators suggesting that they would vote no, or at least expressing discomfort with this nomination?
Only what I've reported in the press, and then what I would characterize as eye roll discussions from others who I don't want to name. But I think there's an old story about a foreign potentate who had a 2-foot-high door built in his reception chamber so that everybody had to crawl in to see him. And I think the Gates nomination is kind of the equivalent of that 2-foot-high door. This is Trump trying to make sure that Senate Republicans will crawl for him. And I don't know that they all will, particularly if the information about his past behavior in these files comes out. So it's going to be very, very interesting. And the fact that they didn't even tell the incoming chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, that they were considering this nominee shows that the Trump folks were paying no courtesy whatsoever to Republican senators, which confirms my view that this is basically the 2-foot-high door crawling test for Republican senators.
Will they meet it? If you were a betting man, you've been around for a while, will this idea, not yet a formal nomination, go forward? Will he be confirmed?
I would be very unpleasantly surprised if somebody with his background, lack of seriousness, and lack of integrity were confirmed as Attorney General of the United States.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, safe travels to Azerbaijan, and thanks so much for talking to us today.